You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Friday. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio podcast. I am your host, Kyle Lamb. We are brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. I hope everybody has had a great week. Take a deep breath, relax. The weekend is almost here, and what a great weekend it promises to be. Whiteout conditions in Happy Valley, 7:30 on Saturday, Ohio State, Penn State, a top 10 clash. The Buckeyes looking the part offensively, Penn State looking the part offensively. This looks like it's going to be a really exciting game. I know many people are very nervous about this game, and reasonably so. I think there's some reason to be pretty nervous because this Penn State team, man, these guys can light up the scoreboard. Ohio State can also light up the scoreboard. Both defenses have had their problems. I think Ohio State's defense is more talented, but that doesn't mean Penn State does not bring a talented defense into this game. Going to blow this game out from every angle here in just a minute. Nate Bauer, editor of Blue White Illustrated. They cover Penn State here on the network. We'll get into the nuts and bolts of Penn State with him. Bill Bender, one of my favorite follows on Twitter. You can follow him at BillBender92. Been around sporting news for several years. Does a great job covering college football. Does many other things as well, but great follow for college football. So Bill Bender, one of my absolute favorites here on the show, will be along here later. We'll not only talk about the Ohio State-Penn State game, but we'll get into some other stuff like Michigan, what's going on in the Big Ten, and some of the national stories as well. We'll talk about Tua Tagovailoa and Alabama, talk about the Clemson situation, Notre Dame, Stanford. We'll get into all that with Bill. Very much looking forward to it. And Ross Fulton of Buckeye Grove, staff analyst. Obviously, you can catch him every Monday. We break down the games along with Kirk Barton. Well, he'll be along here to preview the Ohio State-Penn State game later in the show as well. And at the very end of the show, I have a couple recruiting notes, football and basketball related. We'll talk just a second about those items at the end of the show in the Buckeye Beat session. So, thanks for making us part of your day. You can catch the Unscripted Ohio podcast, of course, every Monday and Friday, and we are on BuckeyeGrove.com. You can also catch us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. And be sure, in addition to finding us and following us on those mediums, you also rate and review the show, and hopefully we can spread the cheer, spread the good news. If you don't mind my taking a part of your day doing these monologues, then definitely we want more people to enjoy the Unscripted Ohio podcast. But I'm not going to mince words. I was thinking about taking time talking about this controversy with Ohio State getting crushed in the media, all because of the graphic that came out on social media about silencing the white noise, referencing the whiteout in Penn State, and basically quieting the crowd is what that alluded to. And we all know, if you follow Ohio State, you know that nothing offensive was meant by that. It was clear-cut. They've used that message before. They used it in 2016. This really was nothing new. But, of course, there are some people in the media and outside the media as well nationally that are trying to make this a story that it really isn't. It's not a story, and it's a contrived story, if that. There's just no meat to this, and I was going to spend some time just going off about this, but you know what? I thought to myself, there's really no point in spending that much energy because it really is a lack of common sense to make this into an issue. And when we've got such a great football weekend coming up, a huge football showdown with college football, Penn State, Ohio State. There's another good game, Stanford, Notre Dame. Clemson, Syracuse could be an interesting game. I doubt it. Clemson may win by 30 points, but there's a possibility of that game being interesting. BYU, Washington could be an interesting game. There's just too much to talk about, especially with Ohio State, Penn State this weekend, to spend much time on that contrived controversy. So I'm going to stick to football, or as people would say on Twitter, I'm going to stick to sports. We're going to dive right into wall-to-wall coverage of Ohio State, Penn State. Of course, if you are still finding yourself for an itch about reading about this game, then go to BuckeyeGrove.com. You can catch Kevin Noon, his analysis and tale of the tape of Ohio State, Penn State. He'll have some other columns. Ross Fulton, of course, taking a deeper dive into this game from a strategical standpoint, an analytical standpoint. But of course, he'll be on the show here later, and we'll get into some of those things as well. But hopefully, we can scratch that itch you have, because Ohio State, Penn State is right around the corner, and it should be glorious. So let's not delay any further. I want to get into this with Nate Bauer, editor of Blue White Illustrated. Thanks for taking the time to do this. As usual, or it feels like it has been almost every year recently, a very, very big game between Ohio State and Penn State.
Yeah, how about it? It's, I guess par for the course at this point. Both of these teams, obviously Ohio State traditionally is such a powerhouse, but Penn State has recently tried to join the club and arguably is getting closer, I guess.
So there are a lot of directions we could go, but I want to start with, probably the biggest question mark coming into the season for Penn State fans, or at least maybe not even so much Penn State fans, but nationally, the question would be, how would Penn State replace Saquon Barkley with Miles Sanders? And obviously the answer so far has been they have done a very good job. Talk about the job he has done, averaging 7 yards a carry here through 4 games.
Yeah, so it's interesting because Saquon Barkley is just such a generational type of talent in terms of a variety of things, obviously, but specifically, I think the thing that Penn State fans and the media, obviously, that covers the team will think of with him is just how electric he was, right? So, his thing was big plays, and he just did it with such consistency that, you never left your seat when there was a possibility that he was going to touch the ball because he could always break a big play. Miles Sanders is not that, right? But I think what has started to identify itself and has started to become clear over the last 4 weeks with Miles Sanders is he doesn't have to be that, right? If Miles Sanders is going to carry the ball 7 yards per touch, which is coming off of he doesn't have big numbers to skew that yards per carry average, right? He's I think his long is 43 yards, which he had last week. So he's got this big yards per carry average, and the reality for him is he's actually doing that. It just seems like every time he touches the ball, he's going for about 5 to 7 yards. And I think in some senses, it's allowing people to realize and reflect on Saquon Barkley and say, for as many 60, 70, 80-yard carries that he had, or as many big receptions that he had, he also had a ton of negative yardage plays, right? He either got buried behind the line of scrimmage or at the line of scrimmage, would try to do a little bit more than the play would allow. And so now you've got this situation where, I'm not going to say that anybody is forgetting or forgot about Saquon Barkley. Certainly they have not. But, Miles Sanders is certainly making it easier, for Penn State fans to swallow.
It's interesting you bring up the negative plays, because that was going to be my next question, actually. Is that a product of the Penn State line being much improved also, or was
No
that,
doubt.
maybe Barkley also trying too hard to bounce a play out into the outside where it wasn't there?
Yep, absolutely. It's a combination of those two things, and I think, this is kind of the natural evolution of what basically Penn State has been trying to get to for years now. If you think back to 2014 when James Franklin took the job, and some of those early games that Penn State had, with Ohio State, it was open season, right? Specifically on Christian Hackenberg, as a quarterback. I mean, how many of those Ohio State games did Ohio State finish with 5, 6, 7 sacks, right? I mean, it was just pretty consistent in lighting them up, just given the challenges that they had on the offensive line. So now, fast forward a few years, and through recruiting efforts and obviously player development, they finally have an offensive line that I think Urban Meyer said earlier this week was, if not the most impressive that they've seen on film, one of the most impressive, right? So, it's been a long time coming. It's something that I don't think Penn State fans had very much patience to deal with at times. But, now they actually have an offensive line that, certainly can hold its own. We just have to see, everyone has to see, whether or not that applies to the better competition in the league.
And, so far, Trace McSorley has been very effective in the designed run game. It's been a big part of what Penn State has done so far. And he seems to be more effective, but he had a lot of run attempts last year, so this is not really anything out of the ordinary. We've known he is a running threat, but it seems to be a more consistent staple of Penn State's offense this year.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I would call it a staple as much as, the whole offense that, this RPO is designed around the idea that, you can basically take advantage of whatever a defense is going to give you, right? So, in a lot of cases last year, if a defense was going to take away Saquon Barkley, it opened up some opportunities for Trace in the passing game, right? There were fewer defensive backs to deal with, so that was a thing that they did. Now, with Barkley gone, a lot of defenses have made the decision to take away the passing game, or to try to take away the passing game for Penn State, which necessarily alleviates some things up there in the trenches. So whether it's Miles Sanders, whether it's handing the ball off to Ricky Slade, or Trace keeping it himself, that's kind of the natural byproduct of those decisions that defenses are making.
Ohio State and Penn State, actually Penn State number 1, Ohio State number 2, the top-ranked scoring offenses in the country coming into this game. And especially from the Penn State side, I think we thought there still could be a good offense, but I don't think we expected to see the type of offense that we're seeing right now. And Ohio State, there was some uncertainty with Dwayne Haskins taking over at quarterback. So from an offensive standpoint, coming into this game, both teams seem to be clicking on all cylinders. The question really seems to be a pair of defenses that are giving up gashes of yards. From the Penn State perspective, what's going on there with the Nittany Lion defense that we've seen so far, where they've been a little inconsistent on the defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, it's super interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
my thoughts back, certainly with Urban Meyer and Ohio State, these games typically have, obviously, what was it, 2014 was totally lopsided. Penn State really didn't have a chance there, but a lot of these games have been about field position and, defensive stands and all that kind of stuff. It's been conservative play calling on both sides, I guess. That I don't expect to be the case on Saturday night, because I think, certainly from Penn State side of things, you're dealing with a defense that is just totally gutted from a year ago. I think they lost 9 guys who started games last season, between the end of last season and the start of this season, including some guys who were expected to be back. Torrance Brown, obviously, he was a defensive end that played a few games last year and had a career-ending injury. That information finally kind of came to light before the start of this season. Ryan Buchholz was a defensive end who actually got hurt in that Ohio State game last year, and he's not back. So when you combine those with a bunch of guys, the entire starting secondary is gone from last year. You've lost some linebackers from last year. It creates a picture of a group that, honestly, it was a lot of guys who the guys who are playing now are a lot of guys who were second stringers who got decent run, but had not ascended into starting positions. They didn't overtake the guys that were in front of them. And then additionally, true freshmen, redshirt freshmen, guys who now have come in and are good enough to supplant some of those guys. So it's not really a matter of athleticism for Penn State's defense. I think that the athleticism is probably there in most cases. It's just a matter of they don't know what they're doing. They're constantly talking about gap accountability, and listen, I am not an X's and O's expert. That's not my deal. But when you're talking about gap accountability, it's a fairly simple concept. And for these guys, a fairly simple concept, understanding that gap accountability is really, really hard. Right? There's a million different situations. There's a million different scenarios that you have to be accountable for out there on the field, and the way to generate knowing what to do in those situations is experience. And this group doesn't have it. So I don't think that it's a coincidence that Penn State has started games. The first half of just about every game that Penn State has played this season has been underwhelming defensively. They've had trouble with everybody. Pitt, Appalachian State, obviously even Illinois last week. They really struggle before they get into the locker room at halftime, at which point coaches are able to settle them down, say, look, this is what they're doing. This is where you need to be. This is what's happening. And, you kind of pounds it in their head over and over and over again. And by the time they come back out in the second half, they've done pretty well. Again, though, just like the offensive line, it's really tough to tell what this team is going to do against anybody with, the type of caliber of talent that Ohio State has.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I was looking at the depth chart, and Penn State's got 7 fourth-year juniors starting on defense, which is a very remarkable stat because you don't see that a lot. A place like Penn State, guys, get thrown into the fire, and if they're good enough to play, they're playing early on. But like you said, it's a very inexperienced defense despite all those guys that have been around for a long time. So just kind of a wacky trend there.
Well, and so fourth-year guys, right, who don't have a ton of experience and don't have starting experience, but also you got to keep in mind, like, haven't been good enough to lock down those jobs permanently. So yeah, they're starting, but Penn State's going. I see it on Saturday night. It's going to be a quick rotation. If it's not the second series, by the third series, you're almost guaranteed to see a ton of second string guys in there, and it's not about keeping the first stringers fresh. It's that the defensive coaches and the staff in general, I don't think, are fully convinced. I don't think, it's when you've got a couple of options that have different attributes, it's not a matter of okay, well, you have a couple of bad options and you pick the best one. It's their strengths are just totally different things. And so they, on a weekly basis, I think they're trying to figure it out. And through 4 games, they're not there yet.
So, Nate, I want to wrap it up on this. So it is an over-under right now of 70 points, a 3.5-point spread. So you're looking at the neighborhood of a 36-33 type of game. Now, it's funny because this series, even in the past where it starts off quick, where it looks like it would be a shootout or something, it doesn't wind up. For whatever reason, the second half of these games totally just tighten up. And, last year, of course, Penn State was out to that huge lead, and Ohio State came back. But I'm curious, do you see this playing out into the shootout that Vegas predicts and these vulnerable defenses that we've seen from these two teams? How do you see this game playing out? Do you think it'll be that type of game?
So I have a question for you first, because obviously you know Ohio State better than me. Has Ohio State faced a legit defense yet? Offensively?
Too soon to say, because I'm still not sure about that TCU defense. The TCU defense was really fast. I want to see it more competition to see how good they were. They were a fast defense, but I'm not sure what kind of defense they're going to be yet. I don't think they're going to be as good as the level we'll see from later in the year from maybe a Michigan. But they were a very quick defense. I'm not sure if they're an elite level defense though.
Okay. So, I would say basically the same thing about Penn State. They haven't faced a great defense. But I'm still banking on both of these offenses being the best thing that either defense has seen so far. And so I believe in these offenses. Put it that way. Whether they've played good defenses or not, I'm convinced that these offenses that both sides have are legit. And so I am kind of on that side of a shootout. Obviously turnovers change things. Turnovers, shorten possessions, and so maybe that's an avenue where if either defense comes up with a turnover, a couple of turnovers, it swings things in terms of a high-scoring nature of the game. But I'm fairly convinced, even after last year, I thought both of those defenses last year were pretty good defenses, but 38-39.
Yeah.
There will be points to be had and big plays to be had. I think that's what both of those offenses are capable of, have shown that they're capable of, and are likely to do on Saturday night.
I agree with you 100% on the offenses. I think regardless of the competition these teams have faced, I think both offenses are legit. I think their scoring averages, their national averages in yardage, I think all of that is not just a product of the competition. I think these two offenses are legit explosive offenses. So I do think there will be some points put on the board here this weekend.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me when looking at the rest of the Big Ten, I mean, it's so stupid and simplistic. That's why we get paid the big bucks. But when I look at Penn State football, I think to myself, who in the Big Ten can score 45 points, right? Like, of the offenses that Penn State's going to have to play, of the offenses that Ohio State is going to have to play, who in the Big Ten it doesn't matter what defense is on the field, which of the offenses in the Big Ten can get to 45 points?
Because this is it right here. These two teams, this is the exclusive list.
Right. So that's what's so fascinating to me is, I think I'm going to mess this up. But it's been 8 games straight dating back to last year that Penn State scored at least 35 points. And I'm going to say maybe 4 times overall that they've scored under 35 points since the start of the 2016 season. So pretty consistently, they're getting to 35, they're getting to 40, 45 points, right? So it doesn't really matter.
So you're trying to say it's going to be a 17-14 type of game?
Basically, just to prove what an idiot I am, right? I mean, now that it's on the record, I'm sure that's the way it'll play out. But it's kind of something that I think we're beyond the stage where it's an anomaly. It's a trend at this point.
Nate Bauer, you can catch him on Twitter at Nate Bauer BWI if you want to catch more of his work, or go to blueandwhiteillustrated.com. They cover Penn State here on the Rivals Network. Nate, it has been a great chatting with you, and I appreciate you taking the time, and should be a lot of fun on Saturday night.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, Bill Bender now, the Sporting News with me. Bill, it is great to have you back. I love talking football with you. It's been a few weeks, and we've got a lot to talk about, I think, this week.
Yeah, there's this game in the Big Ten this week that should be fun. I don't know if I can remember. I'd have to look it up. It can't be possible that 2 50-point Big Ten offenses be on the same field at the same time, and it'll be a pleasure to see that on Saturday night.
Yeah, Nate Bauer of Blue White Illustrated and I were talking about this. We were trying to, we were joking around. It's like, well, in the Big Ten, it's like you go down the list of teams capable of putting up 40, 50 points, and you arrive at only 2 of them, and they're on the field with each other this week. So the 2 big play offenses are there, and now on paper this is expected to be a shootout, and we know sometimes. When you get 2 talented teams like this, 2 physical defenses, regardless of what the stats say, you never actually know until you see it how these games are going to play out. But it would certainly seem with defenses that have been inconsistent and 2 talented offenses, it looks like we're in the makings for a potentially really good game on Saturday.
Yeah, all the seeds for game of the year type thing are there. We mentioned the offenses. You got the quarterbacks. You got Urban Meyer's really first big game back. I think we all knew what they were going to do to Tulane last week. And then, another whiteout. And, that's kind of a misleading thing because I looked at this, and Ohio State's actually handled the whiteout early fairly well. I mean, they've outscored Penn State like 35-14 in the first half in those. And then Penn State will come back in the second half. And then like last year, Ohio State was down 11 at halftime and came back and rallied. So I kind of just do like trying to like throw away what you actually think how a game might start because you kind of just let these two teams go figure it out because, like you said, there's going to be big plays on both sides.
Yeah, it was what was it, a couple years ago where Ohio State started off 17-0, I think, and then they had trouble scoring, and it wound up being like a one-touchdown game. And then, of course, a few years ago, the game that ended on the blocked kick for a touchdown. So yeah, it's like even when Ohio State has started fast in these games, you just never know how the second half plays out. It's kind of fascinating how these games, so many of them, both directions actually, as you mentioned, Ohio State getting down big last year and then coming back. This is a wacky series that you can't be sure how the game's going to play out even at halftime.
No, and well, I think the other thing is, like people are saying, well, App State took Penn State to the limit. Well, I don't care about that now. I think that game's over. That was the first game, and App State has a habit of doing that with a lot of teams. Penn State's got a lot of young players on the back end of its defense, and I think that's kind of where Haskins and the receivers can take the advantage. And we'll see if Penn State's back end's up for that. And then on the other side of it, I think Penn State's got some playmakers on their offense that are ahead of schedule, namely Miles Sanders. I mean, he's not Saquon Barkley, but I also watched him carve up Illinois for 203 touchdowns last week, and they've built through recruiting. I was impressed with Ricky Ronnie in the Fiesta Bowl last year, so as Urban Meyer said on the teleconference this week, he asked his coaches, and he's seeing what I'm seeing. It's the same aggressive, play calling that they had last year. Not much has changed in that regard.
Yeah, there's definitely not been much drop-off whatsoever from what we've seen Penn State. I want to stay in the Big Ten, Bill, and ask you about this Michigan team. They've played better offensively the last few weeks. They've made easier work of SMU and just absolutely crushed Nebraska last week. They go on the road against a Northwestern team that has really struggled. What do you make of this Michigan team? I feel like we still don't know if they're for real yet because of the competition, but they've certainly have improved. What are you seeing with Michigan, and how do you assess them here so far through almost midseason?
I think people only talk about Michigan when they lose at this point, and they do need to win big games, but I think one thing Jim Harbaugh does is take care of games he should win, and that's the difference between him and a Brady Hoke or a Rich Rod. I mean, Rich Rod lost to, Toledo. Brady Hoke lost in his fourth season. I believe he lost to Maryland and Rutgers. So I don't know what to make of them other than I don't know how much of that was their good versus how much of last week was Nebraska's bad. But you have to give credit to Shea Patterson. He's really come along in that offense. They can throw the ball downfield a little bit now. Northwestern game would be interesting because the Wildcats had a week off, but they also lost their running back, which you hate seeing that happen with Larkin. So Northwestern could come out and play, but I don't see Michigan losing that game or next week against Maryland. So I guess it comes down to their next referendum will be kind of an elimination game of sorts with Wisconsin at the Big House there in 3 weeks. I say that because I was kind of plotting out my schedule. I'm guessing I'll be at that one.
Yeah, that's a good one to be at. That'll be an interesting game. I'll tell you this, Bill. What I think Michigan has going for it is I really think that defensive line should be up there in the conversation among the best with Ohio State, Clemson. That Michigan defensive line just looks really good to me. And even though there are still some questions as to how consistent the Michigan running game might be and whether the offense will put up those kind of points that they're putting up right now against better teams, I think that Michigan defense can keep them in games, and I really like that defensive front.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have their say in the Big Ten East. The big game's obviously Saturday, but, I mean, Penn State has to go to Michigan. And, for all the talk about Harbaugh's record against Meyer and D'Antonio, well, he's 2-1 against Franklin. Ohio State, Michigan, I still think will have a large bearing on both the playoff and the Big Ten picture. I would anticipate that game being maybe not it'll depend. I mean, I guess it'll depend. Get back with me on Sunday, but I could see that being similar stakes to 16. Maybe Michigan has an extra loss than they didn't have in 16, but it'll be a big game. And Michigan State's the one that I actually have less of a clue about, because I'm still confused why they lost to Arizona State. I know they had the bye week, looked a little bit better against Indiana, but it seems like Michigan State's season literally will come or go off of the Michigan game. And if they beat Michigan, they could be in the hunt, and if they lose to Michigan, they could be, I don't know, 8-4, something like that.
Pair of quarterback changes I want to ask you about. Let's start first with Stanford Notre Dame, a big top 10 showdown this week. Notre Dame going to Ian Book as their quarterback. What do you make of that decision? It looks like the right call so far. I think the offense has done better with him at quarterback. And what do you make of Notre Dame with him at quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, he threw it around a little bit against Wake, and I know that this is just how Brian Kelly operates. I mean, we could see Winbush this week if Ian Book gets off to a slow start against that Stanford defense. Wouldn't be surprised at all. I think Notre Dame, if you're a Big Ten fan, you kind of want Notre Dame to tank out a little bit, because if they win this game, the back half of their schedule is just not good. I mean, they're going to be in that playoff conversation if they win this game, even though, like how you were saying, how we both kind of agreed that we don't know how good Michigan is. I still don't know how good Notre Dame is. I might not know after Saturday. But that's their biggest game remaining, no doubt. And, if you go by the chalk, they should win. So, but I say all that, and I actually picked Stanford to win. I think Stanford's got a physical defense and is kind of going to be riding the high of coming off a game they shouldn't have won. And I think they get it done in South Bend with David Shaw. And the Cardinal have a brutal schedule, and that's just another road game on their schedule that's absolutely brutal. Yeah,
they got an absolute they should be tried for thievery coming away from that Oregon game with a win, because they had no business winning that game. Another game, Bill, that I'm really interested, 4-0 Syracuse, been kind of a surprise this year going on the road, and yet they're still huge underdogs against Clemson. First, I want to ask you about the Syracuse team, and do they have the chops to go in there? They surprised Clemson last year. Do they have the chops to go into Death Valley and win this game?
On grass, I don't think they do. In the Carrier Dome on a Friday night when Kelly Bryant was banged up, yeah. Trevor Lawrence, there's a reason why Clemson did this. And, I mean, I would start off by saying pretty much a line that most national writers have been writing this week, too, and I think I wrote the same thing, essentially, that I don't think there was any bad guys in this. Kelly Bryant's doing what's best for him, and Dabo's doing what's best for Clemson. And the reason they're going with Trevor Lawrence, whether Dabo's ever going to say this or not, is he's got a live arm, he's got a cannon, and I think if you're asking me right now, just today, I know we got a long way to go, I think Alabama and Ohio State are the two best teams in the country. With Trevor Lawrence at quarterback getting the experience he's going to get for the next 2 months, I think that puts Clemson right there. So, as usual, I mean, that's 1A, 1B, 1C in terms of the best teams in the country, and I think that's how it'll pan out. So, you put Clemson and Ohio State on the same field in a couple months with Trevor Lawrence with some experience, that's a fun game. That's pretty even money to me. I mean, I bet the spread on that would be 1.5 points either way.
Yeah, I've been trying not to. I did just kind of for fun, I did a blind taste test type thing with Tua Tagovailoa versus Dwayne Haskins, looking at their stats, because it's amazing. Tua's getting so much the national recognition, and not that he shouldn't. He's been amazing, but it's funny because Haskins has been almost perfect himself. So I've been trying not to concentrate too much on a hypothetical matchup between those two, but that would be a lot of fun to see that game.
That would dwarf the 14 Sugar Bowl, or 15, whenever they 14-15 Sugar Bowl, because they have quarterbacks that are just out of this world. I mean, Cardale was playing on, a month of experience as a starter, and Blake Sims was good, but he's not Tua. Part of it is, too, I think this is the other thing I found with Lawrence, which I wrote about this week, was he ranked 6th among Power 5 quarterbacks in passing efficiency as basically a half starter, behind Haskins and Tua and Will Grier and Kyler Murray and Jake Fromm And when you put all those 6 names in a blender, those are the 6 probably best national championship contenders if you want to lump West Virginia in there. And that leaves out Penn State with McSorley, but, I mean, they're right there too. So what I'm telling you is you got to have a quarterback that can stretch the field. You got to have a quarterback you can trust. There's no doubt Ohio State has that. And as for your taste test thing, I mean, Haskins, the ball didn't hit the ground. It's ridiculous. I thought he was going to break or at least tie the Buckeyes single-game passing touchdown record last week and a half against Tulane. I was getting ready to kind of send that story over, but they benched him. So I think he's going to have plenty more chances to do that, though.
Yeah, I will say you hit the nail on the head. The contenders this year, they're not winning with championship caliber defense. They're winning with some excellent quarterback play at the top. Those top 5 teams, top 6 teams, all getting tremendous quarterback play right now.
Yeah, and I mean LSU even. I mean Burrow's numbers aren't probably on that level, but what he's done for them is stabilize the offense that was so turnover prone. And LSU through 4 games turned the ball over 1 time. That's amazing. And they've always had the talent on defense. They've got that this year with a couple All-American candidates there. So, and I know Joe Burrow has a fan club in Central Ohio, as he should. I'm a Central Ohio, Southeast Ohio kid. I'm more of a Southeast Ohio kid if you're from Lancaster. I don't know. You can make a judgment on that. But I'm definitely pulling for him and what he's been doing. And LSU plays all their tough games at home, although I think they have a long way to go with those teams that they have on their schedule.
Yeah, Joe Burrow is going to have a couple million fans here in Central Ohio when LSU plays Alabama later in the year. I'm pretty sure of that. So I can already hear the rooting pretty loudly right now, and we're only in September.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of those games I have circled. I think another one coming up in October that's going to be huge is going to be Georgia at LSU, because both of those teams, I honestly think after Penn State, Ohio State, that's the next big one, because they'll both be playing so furious because they both know Alabama's on their schedule. Like LSU could beat Georgia, lose to Alabama, and be 11-1 and have a chance. Georgia, if they lose to LSU and then lose to Alabama, they're out. So, I mean, that's one of those hidden games in there. Not so hidden, but a crossover game that it's going to be huge. And I can't wait to see that one. But the bad thing is we're already in week 5, so I'm feeling like this thing's blowing right past us.
It usually does. Bill Bender, you can catch him on the Sporting News. Catch him on Twitter at BillBender92. Bill, I appreciate it, and we'll get back to you here down the stretch run, late October, early November, and we'll catch up with you again.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Kyle. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Bill.
Ross Fulton is here with his whiteboard to break down what the Buckeyes and their opponents are doing on the field. Can't see the whiteboard? Close your eyes and imagine really hard. It's time to go inside the X's and O's with Ross.
Pain heals. Chicks dig scars. Glory lasts forever.
All right, my man, Ross is back, and it seems like only a few days ago we were chatting. It's because it was only a few days ago, but we had so much fun. Ross has decided to come back and preview this huge showdown. Ross, how you doing, my man?
Doing well. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there, buddy. So we got a big game here to talk about this weekend. Ohio State, Penn State kicking off 7:30 p.m. Whiteout conditions expected in Happy Valley, as usual with this rivalry. So from an Ohio State standpoint, they got their work cut out for them defensively. Let's talk a little bit about the Penn State offense. What can you tell me about the offense that Penn State runs and what Ohio State has to do to stop it?
Yeah, even though Joe Moorhead left to become the head coach of Mississippi State, Penn State is essentially running the same offense, which is somewhat similar to Ohio State. It's a spread read offense, but it's very heavy in its emphasis on run-pass options. They like using a lot of split read plays and then run a quick pop or slant to the backside, tight end or wide receiver. So it puts a lot of pressure on the defense to remain sound at all 3 levels, which has at times been a challenge for the Ohio State defense this year.
What Penn State is getting a lot of, I don't want to say it's running the ball necessarily more with Trace McSorley, but it's been a more successful play with them. The run pass option is something that's always been a part of it, but they are doing a lot of it and doing it pretty well. Do you see anything different from what Penn State has done in the past from when Joe Moorhead is there? Has it changed much, evolved much, or is it pretty much business as usual from the Penn State teams you've seen in the past?
I think your question nailed it. I think I'm seeing a little bit more of running Trace McSorley, particularly in the red zone. Not that they didn't before, but it seems to be a bit more of a reliance. That may just reflect the personnel and obviously the lack of not only Saquon Barkley, but Mike Gesicki. And, the fact that McSorley is the most experienced player they have. Obviously, Miles Sanders, a very good tailback again, not quite as explosive as Barkley, but I think, they're putting a lot on McSorley's shoulders.
Do you see any? Do you see a lot of difference in the offensive line? I was talking about this with Nate Bauer of Blue White Illustrated, and he feels the offensive line has definitely done better. One of the things we talked about was the lack of negative plays this year, and some of that could have been attributed to Saquon Barkley, but it also seems to be attributed to the offensive line getting a better push. Do you see a better performance here from the Penn State offensive line so far this year?
Yeah, I think they're competent. I wouldn't put them as, up in the best offensive lines in the country category, but I think that they certainly have gone from a significant weakness to, if not a strength, as again, at least a efficient level of play. And I do think the lack of negative plays does have something to do with Barkley. And I think this will be a key thing for Ohio State this weekend. Is a big thing that they were able to do against Penn State last year was create a lot of negative plays, particularly against the run, by slanting based on Penn State's alignment and formation tendencies, and put Penn State behind schedule and force them out of where they can really rely on the run-pass options and instead into must-pass situations.
Do you see this as a game where Ohio State will continue the type of protection it's given Dwayne Haskins on the offensive side of the ball? The Penn State defense has, like Ohio State, has really struggled with consistency, giving up big plays. And the Penn State pass rush that has been so good in past years does not seem to be maybe as good as it has. It's not as good this year as it has been in the past. So do you think Ohio State continues to, pick up where it left off here in the previous weeks?
Yeah, it's interesting. Although both defenses have had struggles, they've been a little bit different in their struggles, at least if the advanced statistics are to be believed. Ohio State's defense has been pretty good on a per-play basis. It's just the big plays that have hurt them, where Penn State actually has been pretty susceptible play to play. They haven't given up the big plays, but they can be, people can drive down the field against them. So, I think, again, Penn State, based on what they've done previously against Ohio State, will, again, similar to what TCU did, and even Tulane tried to do for that matter, try to take away the run and force Dwayne Haskins to throw the football. And so I think, again, we'll see Ohio State rely pretty heavily on standard downs, on throwing the football to move down the field.
And I feel like we know Ohio State has protected Haskins so well, but there's still, I think, some fair questions as to just how good the Ohio State running game can be up front, because we have not seen the last couple of weeks, we've not seen the big plays come from Dobbins or Weber, and I think we're still trying to feel out, is that because Weber's hurt, for instance, but also is the Ohio State running game going to be able to show up when it's needed the most against teams like Penn State, Michigan this year?
Yeah, I feel like it's pretty, to me at least, watching the film, pretty well established that the biggest hindrance, if there is one, to the running game, I think the statistics actually bear out it's been pretty good, is the fact that teams are loading the box, and without the quarterback run threat to re-equate numbers, Ohio State is just relying on the passing game more than it would have in the past to run the ball in the face of those kind of overloaded fronts. And so, I think Urban Meyer's made the point a couple of times this week that they'd get past the initial line of scrimmage, and 4 or 5 yards downfield, there's a safety waiting to make the tackle. And in those situations, I mean, if you have a good passer and a good receiving core, you got to throw the football, and that's what they've been doing.
Are you?
But to your initial point, yeah, I mean, I think that Penn State will test, just how well an inexperienced offensive line and inexperienced quarterback handles the Happy Valley whiteout crowd.
Are you surprised teams are still doing that with Haskins' passing ability and their big play ability downfield? Are you surprised that teams are loading the box that way, and how long do you anticipate that might continue?
Yes and no. I mean, I think again, if you put yourselves in their shoes, the biggest known quantity is the Ohio State running game with Dobbins and Weber, and the way that Ohio State's run the football in the past. And again, I mean, Haskins has looked great, but if you're obviously playing a very talented unit in the Ohio State offense, and so if you're going to roll the dice, that they can run the Ohio State can run the football. You still can say, well, maybe Haskins, he's done it at home against lesser competition, maybe did it in Dallas in a neutral field. Again, let's see how he and the offensive line handle this road environment.
So I asked Nate this, and I want to get your take on it. The over-under for this game, 70 points. Vegas thinks it's going to be erring on the side of a shootout. From what you've seen of these two teams so far, Ross, what are you thinking here this weekend for this game?
Yeah, I think for my prediction for Buckeye Grove tomorrow, I think I predicted 37-33, which is right on the 70 points. So I'm definitely leaning towards a shootout, or at least scores in the 30s to 40s. Again, I think that Ohio State has a little bit of an advantage, and that the fact that Penn State's problem is that they've been pretty consistently giving up yards, whereas Ohio State's defense has been more prone to the explosive plays. So even if, for Ohio State's defense, the key is even if you give up some big plays, the key is to get the guy to the ground and not allow the 25-yarder to turn into the 70-yarder that leads to touchdowns.
He is Ross Fulton. You can catch him on BuckeyeGrove.com. As he mentioned, he participates in the prediction pieces, has a couple analysis pieces every week. And, of course, you can catch him wrapping up games every Monday here on the podcast. Catch him on Twitter at Ross R. Fulton. Ross, I appreciate you taking a few minutes doing double duty here for the podcast this week. Should be a fun game, and we will definitely wrap it up with Kirk Barton on Monday.
Absolutely, Kyle. Always happy to do it.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
Before we wrap things up, we got a couple more items of interest here, recruiting related. Did not have enough time for Mark Gibler, recruiting analyst of Buckeye Grove, here on the show this week. But we do have one football recruiting related note and one basketball recruiting related note. First, the football recruiting related note: Jamison Williams, 4-star receiver of St. Louis, Missouri, Cardinal Ritter High School, is expected to announce his decision today, and it is expected that it will be Ohio State. The Buckeyes have been in on Jamison Williams for a long time, one of the top receivers in the country. He is 100% going to Ohio State, according to the new Rivals Futurecast. That is basically the prediction service for Rivals. That includes yours truly. I have a prediction out to Jamison Williams going to Ohio State, but that is for all analysts and publishers on the network. And so it is thought in the consensus of the Rivals Futurecast 100% that he will wind up Ohio State. That is at least 100% of the predictions going to Ohio State. Not that necessarily it is 100% done deal. But it is believed Jamison Williams will be a Buckeye later today. That will end the Ohio State football recruiting drought as far as commitments are concerned. And it is a much, much needed, much hoped for commitment for the Buckeyes if that comes to fruition. In basketball, Ohio State in very good shape to land E.J. Liddell. He is a 4-star top 50 forward from Belleville, Illinois. He visited Ohio State on September 1st. He has his list trimmed down to a final 3 of Ohio State, Missouri, and Illinois. He would cap off the Buckeyes recruiting class, which already contains top 15 point guard DJ Carton and top 30 forward Alonzo Gaffney. Of course, Gaffney committing back in early this summer, back in the spring, whereas Carton committed to the Buckeyes back in the end of July. So E.J. Liddell would cap off a terrific 3-man class that would almost assuredly put the Buckeyes in the top 50. Hopefully next week we'll talk to Corey Evans of Rivals.com about his commitment if that comes to fruition. Tentatively, it looks like he could commit either today or sometime on Monday. I think Monday is the more likelier of the two. It is rumored that he will be deciding on October 1st, which will be Monday. So E.J. Liddell looking like he is a Buckeye lean and could be a done deal anytime. So Ohio State football and Ohio State basketball expected to get some terrific recruiting news here within the next couple of days. That will wrap it up for the show today. I appreciate everybody listening. Hopefully next week we'll get back to the hashtag unscripted mail segment, which I didn't have time for today as well. And this will be a couple weeks now where I have not got a chance to get to your questions. So I will try to get back to that next week. You can catch the Unscripted Ohio podcast every Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com. Of course, you can find, follow, subscribe to the Unscripted Ohio podcast by searching for Unscripted Ohio on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. And be sure to rate and review us as we hope to get the word out about the show. So thanks again for listening, everybody. It is a big college football weekend. Ohio State, Penn State, 7:30 kickoff from Happy Valley on Saturday night. We will, of course, recap the show with Kirk Barton and Ross Fulton on Monday. You won't want to miss that. We'll find out what they had to say about this big showdown, and hopefully it lives up to the hype. It certainly feels like an epic showdown, a great game. I think Ohio State comes out on top by 10 points. That's just my gut feeling, but I do think it's good. Penn State is a very good team, and I think this is going to be a very, very good game as we are expecting. So hope everybody has a great weekend. Join us again on Monday as we recap the show. Thanks for listening, everybody. Go Bucks.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.